Good afternoon and evening, everyone. This is the Game Sage here, ready to bring you our next Game Maker Studio tutorial. And in this video, we're going to be covering one of my favorite topics in game programming and Game Maker Studio, and that is player animation. So currently we have our character. He can move around the screen, but there's no animation tied to him. You know, he can jump, he can move left, he can move right, but it's just one static image, which is rather depressing. So we're going to be animating him in this episode. But before I get into that, I want to touch upon a little glitch we ran into at the end of our last episode. If we're standing on the floor or a platform like this, and we drop down and then press left immediately, you'll notice that we get stuck on the wall. And the same applies if we do it here. Let me see if I can do it here as well. There you go. So that looks really weird, and it's just a major problem. And the reason it was doing this is, first we put precise collision. So if you look at it, these two pixels right here, this pixel, these two pixels, and this pixel, when we're pressing down and falling and then pressing left immediately, it's getting caught in the wall because it's precise collision checking. So it's, you know, running into these two pixels. So while precise collision is great, you know, you want to be careful where and how you use it. So let's go ahead and remove precise collision checking. And then here's the other problem. If we remove precise collision checking and we run the game, well, now you have all this white space and it's not perfect collision. It just looks really bad, and you can't even, you know, fit through holes. You can't fit through here. It's just bad. And it's terrible, actually. Look at this. I mean, he should fall right there, and he's not. So an easy fix around this is if we go to our Sprite player and then go to Edit Sprite, under the Transform option, there is a tool called Crop. If we set our border size to 0 and hit OK, what this does is all that white space that was around our character sprite, it removed it. So now when I hit check mark and then check mark again, and I center the sprite and I run the game, that should be fixed. So all we did is remove all that white space around our character, and look at that. It's almost like precise collision checking again, only without the precise collision. And now we are no longer getting caught in the wall. So easy fix, nothing too complicated, and pretty simple. So the key is, for every sprite you import into your game, you're really going to want to make sure that you remove all extra excess white space or space around that sprite image to avoid getting caught in walls. And there's another way to do this called masks, and I'll probably touch on that in a future tutorial. But for now, the best way to handle this is just whenever you import an image, remove all the white space around them, and it should really prevent you from having these little issues of getting caught in the wall. So anyways, let's get into animating our character. So first thing I'm going to want to do is I'm going to want to add a couple sprites. So I'm going to show you how to add from a strip. Create sprite. We'll call this one SPR walking, and this will represent our animation of our character walking. Now instead of load sprite, you're going to want to go to edit sprite, file, create from strip, and then select your sprite sheet, because we're going to be importing multiple images, not just one image. So creating from sprite, creating sprite sheet, or creating from strip, I should say, allows you to import multiple images, and it brings up this new editor I'll show you in a second. So once you do that, remove the background, hit open, and it's going to bring up this load a strip image editor along with the sections. You get to choose what sections of this entire image you want to load in. So we want to look for Link walking. Here is his idle stance, and these three animations here look like him walking. Excuse me. So what I want to do to make this easiest as possible is select, using this square, kind of put it over the first image you want. So what I like to do is kind of put it over the first image. That's his first walking animation or image. So I kind of center it. That's perfectly centered there. And the image width looks good. Image height, got to increase or else it's going to cut his feet off. So I'll put it at like 35. Or let's do 36 to be on the safe side. So that looks good. And then we want to grab multiple images. So that's one image that's technically grabbed there. So number of images, we got this whole box over here. Number of images, let's set to 3. Then images per row, let's set to 3. And you'll see that that worked pretty well here. Now horizontal separation I have set to 7. If we set that to 1, you'll notice that it's not grabbing it properly. So what that does is it kind of like creates a border in between each of these images you're grabbing, which allows me to grab them easier. So all I did was number of images 3, images per row 3, horizontal separation 7, and it looks like they're all centered pretty well. So let's go ahead and hit OK. And here, you'll notice if we show preview, it's actually showing him walking. Pretty cool, huh? So it loads like a whole animation. If you want to make sure it's good, edit the image, and here it lets you actually go between each frame, and that's pretty good. It's not perfect because if you go to image 3, like image 1 is good, image 2 is good. If you go to image 3, it looks like he's moved. It's not like perfect, but I actually like it like this. I think that gives it variety, like him moving a little bit like that instead of standing like a robot. So I think that's kind of cool, like a little motion to his animation. So I like that. We don't really need to fix the image. If we did have to fix it though, you can fix it easily by going to the selection tool, highlighting the whole image, and then just moving them left like that. And now you'll see it looks good. Like he's not moving at all. But I, for whatever reason, like that little offset on the third image. I don't know. It just gives it like a more realistic motion or something. I can't really explain it. So that's pretty good. That looks good for walking. So let's go ahead and hit OK. And we have our walk animation. Now make sure we center it. Hit OK. And the one thing I forgot to do is, again, I mentioned this. Let's go to Edit Sprite. We want to get rid of all this white space. So transform, crop, border size 0. And it'll do that for all of our images in the set. So that's cool. Looks good. So we have our walking animation done. Hit OK, or a walking sprite added into the game. Again, hit center, hit OK. And now I'm going to want to add one more for the purposes of this tutorial. So create sprite. We'll call this one SPR ducking. Edit sprite, file, create from strip. We're going to select the same image here. Remove the background so that black goes away. Open. And now we got to look for his ducking. Well, first of all, number of images is only 1 because the ducking is only literally 1 image. And where is it? Here it is. Here's his ducking. And that's all we have to do. We don't need a horizontal separation or worry about any of this other stuff because it's just 1 image. So this is ducking animation. We have it selected pretty well on the square. Hit OK. Remember, we're going to want to get rid of the white space. So transform, crop, border size 0. And they got rid of all the white space for us. Check mark, OK. OK. We're going to want to center it. Hit OK. And now we have all the animations imported into our game, or all of the sprites imported in the game for the purposes of this tutorial. So again, we have our just regular sprite of him just standing. We have our walking sprite, which is an animated sprite, and it actually animates. 3 images in 1. And then we have our ducking, which is just a single image, and it's just him ducking. So that should be all we need for this tutorial. Let's go into our objects and start coding this thing in. So first thing we're going to want to do is in our create event, we're going to want to create 2 new variables, and I'll explain them in a second. So the first one's going to be called ducking, and we're going to set that to false by default, and I'll explain what that means in a second. And our next one's going to be called grounded, and I'm going to set that to false by default as well. So I'm creating what's called the state system for our animations, and what this means is in the step event, I'm going to determine when our character's ducking, and when he's ducking, I'm going to set this variable to to true. Otherwise, it'll be false. And I'm going to determine, we already kind of know when he's on the ground. So when he's on the ground, this grounded variable is going to be set to true. And then when he's in the air, it's going to be set to false. So these 2 variables are just going to help us in determining help us, go between our animations, basically. So ducking equals to false, grounded equals to false, because by default we're not ducking, and by default we're not on the ground, we're in the air. So you'll understand that a little better once I start implementing them. So now let's go to our step event, and we can start coding some of this stuff in. So first two things I want to add is so if we're moving right, move right. If we're moving left, whoa, sorry about that. If we're moving right, move right. If we're moving left, move left. If we're not moving, don't move. I'm going to add a new check, keyboard check, saying set to ducking. And I'm going to do if keyboard check vk underscore down. So if we're pressing the down arrow key on our keyboard, I'm going to set the variable we just created, ducking, is equal to true. Because one thing, if you guys don't know programming, you have your normal variables that could equal any value, but then you have your true or false variables called Boolean variables that you can set to true or false, which is pretty helpful in games as well. So if we're pressing the down arrow key on our keyboard, the ducking variable is equal to true, so it means we're going to be ducking. And then we're going to have an else case. So if we're not pressing down on our keyboard, ducking equals false. And then you'll understand where we'll use that at the bottom of our code. So if we're pressing the down arrow key on our keyboard, ducking equals true. Otherwise, it equals false. Simple enough. So now we just need to set our grounded variable as well. Well, if you remember our last tutorial, we know when we're on the ground, if place meeting, all that, when we checked to see here if our player's on the ground. So where we set our vertical speed set to 0, we can also set grounded equals true. Because we know at that point that we were on the ground. Because remember, if we were on the ground, set our vertical speed to 0, and then it allows us to jump and all that from the last tutorial. But here I'm just setting a grounded variable to true. And we know if we're not on the ground, we're setting gravity on our character, we can say grounded equals false. So those are basically the two variables we need to set. So again, one more time, if we're ducking, we're setting the variable to true. If we're pressing the down arrow key, setting to true. If we're not, it's false. And grounded, if we're on the ground, it's true. If we're in the air, it's false. So all we have to do now that we have all of that done is we have to handle our animation, and we're switching between animations. So right now, we didn't do anything. All we did was set variables. First thing I want to do is mirror. So if I go and run my game here, let's just run it to show you. Didn't really do anything. Same thing. So what I want to do first is, right now if I'm moving left, it looks weird because he's kind of just like floating left. I want to do it where if I press the left arrow key, it's going to flip the sprite or mirror the sprite to the left. And if I press the right arrow key, it's going to mirror it back to the right. So this is real easy to do in Game Maker Studio. Let's go back to our step event. And here where we're moving right, I'm just going to add something to it. So where we were moving right, crap, that's not what I wanted to do. So originally we were moving right, we set our horizontal speed to 3, and now I'm also going to want to do a new code that you guys probably have never seen before. Image underscore X scale, and I'm going to set that to 2. And I'll explain that in a second. And then if we're pressing left, stupid built-in variables, it's like messing me up here. There you go. So when we're pressing left, we set our horizontal speed to -3, and now I'm going to do image X scale equals -2. Now why 2 and -2? Well, if you remember in our room where we added our actual character, to make him a little bigger on the screen, we set his scale as X scale to 2. -2 literally flips the sprite around. So whenever I'm pressing left, we set it to -2, flipping his sprite or mirroring him. And then whenever we press right, we set it normal, which is how he looks in the game right now. So now if we run our game like this, if we press left, you'll notice that it's mirroring the sprite left. So far so good. That's kind of what we want. And jumping, same thing. It keeps it mirrored. So far so good. So all we have to do now is literally implement our ducking animation and our walking. So let's go back to our object player. And all the way at the bottom, at the end of all of this, we're going to start a new little segment, a new section of code. We'll call it, where's my notes here? Yes, I do have notes because I can't memorize all this stuff. Handling animation. So this is where we're going to be actually switching between the different animations that our character can have. First thing we're going to want to do here is display the proper animations while on the ground. So first we're going to want to handle all the animations while the player is on the ground. So we remember up here we know when our player is on the ground, we set our variable grounded equals true when he's on the ground, and it's false when he's not on the ground. So all we can do now is something simple like if grounded, which means if grounded, it's another way of saying if grounded equals true. Same thing. So if grounded is true and he's on the ground, perform whatever we have in these brackets. So now we know when he's on the ground and when he's not. So if grounded, perform whatever I have on those brackets. And if he's not grounded, display proper animations while in the air. So that will be the else case. So now whatever we put in between these brackets will be the animations, handling all the animations while he's on the ground. And down here, in between these brackets, we'll be handling all the animations while he's in the air. So let's start with the ground animations. Well, if he's moving while on the ground, he's obviously walking. So what we have to do to check that is if the horizontal speed, HSP, is not equal to 0. So if his horizontal speed while on the ground is not equal to 0, we know that he's moving. Pretty simple. So we can do sprite underscore index, which represents what our current sprite is set to on this object, SPR underscore walking. So what that literally does is it changes our current sprite index right now by default is set to SPR player, which is just our character standing animation. So if we're on the ground and his horizontal speed is not 0, we know he's walking, so we're changing his sprite to the walking animation. That's all we're doing. Simple. Okay, so that's number 1. Well, what else can he be doing when he's on the ground? He can be ducking, and he could be standing still. So the next thing we're going to do is else if ducking. Because remember, up there, we know when he's ducking, whenever we press the down arrow key, ducking equals true. And whenever we let go, ducking equals false. So whenever we're pressing down, we want him to duck, and it's set to true. So if ducking equals true, we can just do sprite underscore index is equal to SPR underscore ducking. It's pretty simple. Okay. And then last thing is, well, if he's not walking while on the ground and he's not ducking, and then he's obviously standing still, right? So then all we have to do is else. We know he's standing still on the ground at this point because there's nothing else to check for. So else sprite index is equal to SPR player, which is just his idle stance. And that's it. That handles all of our animations while he's on the ground. So if horizontal speed is not equal to 0, we know he's moving on the ground. Set it to his walking sprite. If he's ducking while on the ground, sprite index equals SPR ducking. And else, if he's not doing either one of those, then sprite index equals SPR player. Easy. So now we just have to handle all the animations for when he's in the air. So, so if ducking, because you're allowed to duck while you're in the air. So the only things you're going to be able to do while you're in the air is you're going to be able to duck, and that's it. So you're either going to have your, while you're in midair, there is no jumping animation for this sprite set. So you're either going to be able to have your ducking animation while you're in the air, or you're just your normal idle animation. So this is really easy to program. If you're ducking, so it's going to be basically, what that means is, if we are ducking while in the air, sprite underscore index is equal to spr underscore ducking, sorry. Okay. And if you're not ducking in the air, well, else sprite underscore index is equal to spr underscore player. And that's all we have to do, pretty much. So if you're, we know here he's in the air. If he's ducking, it's going to show his ducking animation while in the air. And if he's not ducking, it's going to show his normal idle animation. So now if we run the game, let's test it and see if it works. Okay. So there's a couple things here that we got to fix. First of all, here's a couple little things. First of all, you'll notice that when he's walking 1,000 miles an hour. His sprite animation's out of control. And then here's the other thing. We can actually, this works pretty well because we can actually duck and jump while we're in the air. But look at this, a couple problems. First of all, he can move while ducking. That's an issue. And secondly, if you duck while on the ground and then you try to move, you can't move. So there's a lot of little glitches going on here, and I'll cover them one by one. First, alright, sorry about that. I got distracted. Okay, so first thing we want to do is prevent him from moving while he's on the ground. Well, where we set grounded to true, we can easily prevent him, like, we can check if he's ducking while on the ground. So we know he's on the ground at this point where we set grounded to true, and we can say, well, if he's on the ground and if ducking, so if you're ducking while you're on the ground, then you could just set your horizontal speed equal to 0. So if ducking, prevent him from moving, simple enough. Set horizontal speed to 0 while he's on the ground. Now the reason I didn't just do this somewhere else is because I only want him to not be able to move. Like if he's ducking and on the ground, I don't want him to move. But if you're in mid-air and ducking, you shouldn't just drop straight to the ground. There should be some like sense of gravity moving you in an angle or diagonally. So I just wanted to put this line of code here. Only when you're on the ground and ducking, set your horizontal speed to 0. So that fixes one issue. The other issue we have to fix is the animation. He's moving extremely fast when walking. This is an easy fix. All we have to do is go to where we're setting the walking sprite down here. And all we have to do is just set the image speed. There is a property called image speed. So let's open this up a little bit just so that we can put another condition here. So all we have to do is just set image underscore speed. And in this case, I'll just do equal to 0.2. You can experiment with this number, but 0.2 should handle his animation pretty smoothly. It should be slow enough and not look stupid. So let's try it. So there you go. Look at that. That looks a lot better for walking. It's still a little funky, and we can play around with that and fix it so it looks a little cleaner. But now you have a solid walking animation, and you can duck. And look at this. If you duck and you try to move, you can no longer move, so that works. So you can duck while jumping. Now there is one more issue we got to fix, and that's this. When you duck, if you notice, if you pay close attention to his feet, when he ducks, look at that. He's getting stuck on the ground. And this is where collision masks come in handy. So what we want to do to fix this is pretty simple. If we go back to, let's go to our sprite ducking. if you look closely here, edit sprite, what's happening is this image is not exactly the same size as our walking or player idle animations or sprites. So what's happening is the center is of like at the same place. So when he's ducking, it's kind of pushing him into the ground. So later we're going to use collision masks to get around this, but an easy fix to this for now, temporarily, would be, right now he's fully centered. Oh, my leg is killing me. Sorry. So right now he's fully centered. If we set his origin, his Y origin, to something a little higher, like let's say, let's just do 11. Oops. So all we did was move it, like this would be centered. Centered is 13, so let's just move a little higher. 11. So now when he gets pulled into the ground, he is not centered into the ground. So the center of his origin is no longer in the ground. So now he's no longer getting stuck, see? So it kind of fixes it. It's not perfect. But it looks like we are pretty good. I mean, look, we got character. He can move around. He can jump around. Animations are good. He can fit in the wall. My favorite's the walking. He looks badass, like kind of like walking like that. But you can. My favorite thing is that you can duck and jump. So ducking doesn't automatically bring you to the ground, but then if you're ducking on the ground, you can't move. So it looks pretty good. It actually looks a lot like Zelda 2, and yeah. So that concludes this tutorial. I hope you guys enjoyed it. If you have any questions, please comment down below and feel free to ask. So this pretty much opens up future tutorials, and we can go anywhere we want from here. So I hope you guys enjoyed and learned something, and in our next tutorial, well, we'll see where we go from there. I will see you guys later. This has been the Game Sage, bringing you another Game Maker Studio tutorial. I will see you guys later. Peace.